Well, we're going to be looking at the budget presentation yesterday by the finance minister, and I have here with me an economic analyst, Mr. Ezekiel Adeleye, to discuss that. Good morning, Mr. Adeleye.
Good morning.
Well, I understand there's so much traffic out there.
That is true.
So sorry about that.
Yes,
well, if you had listened to what the finance minister said yesterday, in fact, her presentation was quite different from the usual thing, reeling out figures and all that. She went down to earth to make Nigerians understand what Nigerian budget is all about. He started by explaining that the budget is not just about the resource allocation. It's kind of a platform for the federal government to launch its policies that would actually see to the development of the country. For instance, the budget captioned a budget of inclusive growth and job creation, and some people would wonder, why would we say, oh, this is a budget of inclusive, so how is it? So they are looking at the resources, they're looking at the figures there, and not seeing the nitty-gritty of it, some of these policies that are included there that can actually see to, achieving some of those things like job creation, for instance. Like in some of their budget, you could see their fiscal policies where, for instance, waivers, and so on. What's your take on that?
Well, I believe in what the minister said, and the fear of Nigerians has to do with implementation in the past years. So do not blame Nigerians. I mean, if beautiful policies in the past have been announced by the federal government and ministers have announced such, Nigerians have had faith in them in the past, but when it comes to implementation, it's going to dovetail to the various people down to the ministries, and when it's not properly implemented is when you have a flop up of all those things. And at the end, such beautiful goals are not being realized. It's a wonderful thing that in days you want to create jobs, because just like the program you had earlier on, until when jobs are created and Nigerians are empowered, that's when they could be able to finance houses, even where the primary lender had advanced them loan to purchase one. When they're unable to get jobs, then of course it's going to be foreclosed by the primary lender. So definitely the policies must be properly implemented, and I have faith that in this particular year, government desires so that the reporting card for next year's election will be beautiful.
Well, talking about the housing, in fact, that is a key factor of the 2014 budget, according to the finance minister. Of course, she did mention the launch of the NMRC, and she said that the federal government hopes to establish a wholesale development finance institution to help in medium and long-term, financing.
That's true.
What do you think about that?
It's beautiful because most funds that are being used to finance houses in the past, aside from National Housing Fund, which was in place that most organizations did not key into, this time around, the private initiative, that's the mortgage banks now, the primary mortgage banks, use their own capital. It's been raised now to 2.5 billion and 5 billion, depending on whether it is state or national. That fund is still small to meet the housing stock that is required for Nigerians. The deficit is about 17 million that has to be provided on an annual basis. And if we have to rely on how many mortgage banks now that are viable by 5 billion, assuming they are all national banks, it's limited. But with the NMRC, it provides a lot of funds. Secondly, it provides a long term. Most mortgage banks now do maximum of 10 years. Now we can have 20 years to 30 years. That's quite long, and it gives a reduced repayment plan for will-be house owners, and that means we can be able to keep. So it's a beautiful plan that we are looking elsewhere for large sums of money that is long-term in nature to be able to finance houses.
Now, you talked about implementation, and she did mention that part of the problem, when you say, oh, they've not implemented and all that, first of all, it has to do with the budgeting process, whereby it takes a very long time. By the time they gather all the stakeholders, send it to the house for deliberation, there's always issue, $79, $75, and then they keep, delaying. And she actually suggested, and she says that's exactly what happens in most other developed countries or even developing countries. And she's advocating that there should be an independent body that can actually help to look at some of these parameters instead of just getting the stakeholders and then keep arguing and all that. But when you get an independent body to look at these parameters, it will actually hasten the process of budgeting, and there you will now begin to see some changes even in the implementation of the budget. Do you agree with that?
I agree with her completely, because the fear I know for now, for this year, is that, as usual, the budget is being discussed, in arrears. It's supposed to be 2014 budget, and this is January, and we're having details being supplied to the National Assembly. And before we meet in the next 30 days, 60 days, we are still debating. And we know that government budget drives the economy in this part of the world. So definitely, if there have been experts who have considered those technical issues therein, they simply can be able to pass the budget much faster, and I think it would be of help to this economy. Looking at 2014 budget in January and perhaps to be passed, and by the time it's being passed again, they are looking at the allowances, and then they want to raise the benchmark again from $77. Left for me, it should have been pegged at $74 per barrel. But then she has proposed 77 as a midway, because they are looking at $79, $78 by the two houses, now $77. I hope we'll be able to resolve it as soon as possible, that the implementation can start latest by 1st of February. That would be fantastic.
All right, thank you very much, Mr. Adeleye. That's the much we can take on this conversation. I just wish we have enough time, but that's okay. Thank you for coming. Well, I've been speaking with Mr. Ezekiel Adeleye. He is an economic analyst. And it's on that note we draw the curtain on today's edition of the program. Thank you very much for being with us. And do remember to join us again same time tomorrow. News Track is next.